Hello again. Welcome to part 2 of the tutorial on how I edit my own photos in Affinity Photo. As I said in part 1, and if I can work out how to do it, I'll put a reminder, a link to it up here. If not, it'll be down in the description notes beneath. If you missed part 1, this isn't really a tutorial by somebody who claims to be an expert in Affinity Photo, or indeed an expert in post-processing in general. This is sort of talking you through what I believe to be the 10 or 12 most important adjustments, tools and controls that the majority of photographers will need to use time and again in order to improve their images. And we started out with what I would call a very much so-so image, and I'll put it up on screen for you now, of a small yacht that was beached off the Wirral here in the northwest of England, and it was taken on a Fuji XE2. I didn't have the right footwear on to get closer to it, neither did I have a longer reach lens, so I'm stuck really. It's, you know, it's pushed too far into the distance. We need to do something to it to improve it to any great extent. Now I'm going to put on screen the straight out of camera image, and alongside it where we got to at the end of the first session. So from memory, what did we do to it? We cropped it, we straightened the horizon line, we adjusted the exposure, the brightness, the contrast and black point, we increased vibrance and saturation, and we added a gradient to the sky to bring down the density of the sky at the top of the frame. And that's really where we left it at the end of the first session. So what I want to do today, I want to try and keep this short, again under 20 minutes if I can. What I want to do today is to enter into the realm of photo editing that people perhaps find less agreeable, and that is to remove images that, in our opinion, detract from the overall appeal. And in this particular case, we have the two boats in the far distance on the left hand side of the frame. They don't really add anything to the composition, so in my personal opinion, I feel it's worthwhile in getting rid of them. Now, there are two tools that you can use to do this, and again, this applies not just to Affinity Photo. My favorite for this particular example would be the clone stamp tool or clone brush tool. Some software packages refer to it as a rubber stamp tool. The other one that you can use is the healing brush tool. Now I'll start off with that one. I need to magnify the image to begin with and center up these boats. Now we'll use the healing brush tool. You need to tell the software the image that you want to duplicate to begin with, and that's going to appear in that white circle. Now the white circle is the size of your brush. You can select different brushes from the palette on the right hand side to suit whatever subject you're dealing with. I'm going for a soft edged brush. It's a bit big at the moment, so we'll just reduce it by using the square brackets keys, and then we press Alt on a PC, and I think it's Command on a Mac. Hold down the Alt key and left click the mouse button, and it then selects the area. There's a little black square, and you can see now if I move the brush around, it's picked up the sky and the beach. Now what I want to do is to simply paint along here, and you can see that it's removed the ferry in the far distance. So I'm going to continue with the healing brush tool and paint out the blue yacht. Like so. Okay, so that's gotten rid of the blue yacht, and we can continue. All you need to do is to make sure that you are, in this case, on that horizon line where the beach meets the ocean beyond, and then you can simply paint it out like so. Now just let me zoom out, which is Control 0, and you can see that that's in my opinion again more effective. Those two yachts weren't adding anything. Now if I'm going to be nitpicking, I also need to do something about the remains of their reflection in this little bit of water here, so we will magnify it a little bit more. I'll go back now. Instead of using the healing brush tool, I'm going to use the clone brush tool, which essentially does pretty much exactly the same job. I want a much smaller brush this time. And we'll select that area there and paint in like so. Now I'm going to need to resample this section, and I'll just center up this little bit of reflection here, and I'm going to sample this section of water here and bring it across there like so. That's better, and while we're at it, I'm going to get rid of this, whatever it was in the far distance, this bit of highlight here. Zoom out, and I'm much happier with that now. The eye is focused much more on the little yacht in the middle distance there. So agree with me or not, there are many occasions when removing items like this can vastly improve your image making. And if you think about it, I really don't believe that there's an artist in this world when they're painting a landscape that doesn't modify what he or she sees in front of them. They either emphasize different parts of the landscape or they remove them altogether. So so far so good. Now what else could we do? Just to illustrate what we can do with another tool which is very important is the selection tool, which also leads on to the subject of layers. Now layers sometimes confuse people and sometimes actually frighten them. There's no need to be frightened about using layers. It's something that you will find more and more often as you get into post-processing. A layer is simply, I like to think of it as being the old overhead projectors that we perhaps had in school back in the day, where you had clear pieces of acetate on which you could write or print particular diagrams, and then you could put more acetates on top of the original one and it would build up an image for you. And the layers in Affinity or Photoshop or Capture One, whatever it might be, they're the same principle. It's like putting sheets of paper or acetates on top of each other, and you can adjust them, remove them and alter them independently. Now I don't want to get into it in too great detail because I never get into it in too great detail in my own editing. However, on this case, just to illustrate the point that I want to make, I'm going to select this area of water in the foreground, which, because we've darkened down that lovely blue sky, this is looking a little bit washed out and I want to give it a bit more oomph. So I'm going to use the selection brush tool, and you adjust this in exactly the same way as any other brush. You can use the square brackets tool to either make it larger or smaller, and all I'm going to do is to start, if my machine catches up with me, making a selection. 9 times out of 10 it won't give you a perfect result, as is obviously the case here. So what we then do is I'm going to magnify it so I get a better idea of what's going on, and then just reselect the tool. And if you look up at the top here, we do have various options. The one we want to focus on is refine, and that will allow me to actually alter the area that the computer has selected. And if I want to remove some of the selection, I will select the background, and we can then tell the machine, hang on a minute, this bit here should not have been included in the selection. When we let go, it should automatically take that into account, and if we click on apply, you can see that the selection has now changed. Now we can do this however many times we need to. Just let me move this sub menu out of the way. We'll select background again, and this I wanted not to be in the selection. I'm not doing this very precisely because of time restraints. Just a little bit along here, and oops, and here, and these pebbles poking out of the water, I don't want those included in the selection. Now we click on the apply button. Now you can see it's gone the opposite way here. We will refine it again, and instead of using background, we will select foreground, slightly smaller brush, and just paint away the bits that the computer got wrong. Now this should not take you very long to do. I mean, depending on what your selection is in the first place. And it went wrong there, didn't it? Yes. So we'll just do that. And down here was a bit off as well. Okay, that'll do. So I'm going to hit the apply button. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to say that I'm happy with that. Just let me zoom back out. So we've now made a selection of that little stream, if you like, of water, and I want to give that some more vibrance and or color saturation. So if we click on the adjustment tool, the adjustment pane, we can drag it down. If I can find it, we can drag it down as far as vibrance, and we are then given 3 choices initially. We can either use the default, which is as the image is now, or we can simplify it or complicate it. So just for the hell of it, we'll select complicate, and we're then given this little sub menu, if you like, and we can increase the vibrance and we can increase the saturation. I don't want to take it crazy bright, but we'll see what that looks like. And when you're happy with it, you can close that down, and to get rid of the marching ants, which is what we refer to this shape as, we go to select and deselect. And now we have a stream in the foreground which resembles in a more accurate way, I think anyway, the sky up above. You may disagree, it's a very personal thing. And you can see that if we select the layers tab, we have 2 layers. We have our background, which is the original photograph, and we have our adjustment layer, which is just the stream down here, and we used a vibrance adjustment in that. And if I magnify the image just to give you an idea of what it actually looks like, you can see that even though I was pretty quick with that selection, it looks, and you know, to my eye, it looks pretty convincing. Let's zoom back out. Now, for today, I'm thinking that this is going to be as far as I take it for you. When you get to this stage, let's assume that we are now happy with this as a finished image. You are going to have to save it in one format or another. Now, we have the persona up here, which is what Affinity Photo refers to as the sort of liquefy, develop, tone mapping and export persona. Now, I never really use the export persona, but it is extremely powerful within Affinity Photo. All I would say to you is that remember this: if you want to save it as a JPEG, JPEGs do not support layers, so you would have to flatten the image in order to save it as a JPEG. TIFF, on the other hand, does support layers, so we could save this as a TIFF file, in which case it would preserve the original photograph with the layer on top of it. We could also save it as exactly as is, as an Affinity Photo file, and that would be exactly the same thing. It will preserve all the information that we've inputted into it, including the history, and it would save the two layers. So if I just go to File, excuse me, and drag it down to Export, which is the way that I normally do it, it then gives you a whole range of files that you can save it as, different file formats. PNG, useful sometimes, but not that often with regard to photographic imaging. JPEG, which is probably one of the very common ones. Graphic image file, again, possibly if you're doing something on social media, that might come in useful. TIFF, PSD and PDF. Now, if I click on JPEG at the moment and say export, and we will save it as so far, where are we up to? So far 5. Okay, so can you see what's happened? I'll just run back through that because I skipped through it really. I saved it as what I've called these is the image straight out of camera, and then so far 1, so far 2, etc. This I saved as so far 5 as a JPEG. I have then reopened that file, so far 5 JPEG, and can you see we've lost the layers? It's squashed them together and deleted all the history. If I go back to our modified file, you can see that we've got the 2 layers and the history. Okay, so you can see that if you save images as JPEGs, then you lose the layers. It will automatically flatten the image back to just one layer, if you like. If you want to preserve the layers, you can save it as either an Affinity Photo document or you can export it as a TIFF file. If you want to save it as a TIFF file and preserve the layers, you need to put a check in this little box here which says Save Affinity Layers, and export it. We'll give it a name, so far TIFF. And it'll take a few seconds to save it because it's a much larger file size, of course. So after just a few seconds it has saved it as a TIFF file, and now I'm going to open that same so far TIFF, there we go. And there we are. You can see that we have the layers preserved, so we could come back to this anytime in the future and carry on working on it. Now I think that's probably a long enough video for this part 2 of my editing techniques. What I want to do in the next one is to take, again, I'm going to keep concentrating on this same image at least for the next installment, so you'll have to put up with this boring shot for a while longer. But what I want to do in the next tutorial episode is to show you a way that we can alter the image more drastically by completely changing the sky, and also to introduce you to the wonderful world of filters. So until the next time, I hope I haven't bored you to tears. Thank you everybody for watching. The views mean an awful lot to me, and until the next time, I will say enjoy your photography, enjoy your post-processing editing, and I'll see you really soon. Bye bye for now.